Before we dive into the survey that's on this screen, let me remind you that surveys are dangerous. I know that sounds dramatic and over the top, and obviously they're not life-threatening, but they are business-threatening. Surveys are so easy to send out. They're often like a default research method. And the risk of that is that we send out a survey to do another research method's job, or we send out a survey that is poor in quality, bad questions, biased questions, perhaps we don't know enough about the audience to ask nuanced questions. And so the data that we get back is actually subpar, quite misleading and inaccurate. The problem with that is that when we have data from a survey, it's really difficult to ignore. People love numbers. There's a concreteness to the data that you get from a survey because you can sort and anchor it, and there's a way to quantify even the qualitative of a survey. And so the qualitative data. And so that's a risk, right? Like it might be a whole bunch of like lies essentially because it's bad, murky and biased data. But it will spread. Like people will hang on to these data points and these summarized findings because it's there, it's tangible, it's concrete. But concrete doesn't mean accurate. So don't send out a survey if you don't need to send out a survey. Let's take a look at this one and see what's happening. So as you can see from what it's got on the screen, I'm on the Ontario Cannabis Store website, and they have a pop-up that shows up when it looks like they're saying, fill out a quick survey before you go to help us improve OCS.ca. I actually recorded this in real time, and I actually wasn't leaving the website at the time. So when it popped up, I was inclined to click no thanks just because it felt like it was interrupting my experience. A survey will always essentially interrupt a user's experience, but if it feels relevant and it aligns with the action that they're kind of in the middle of taking, they're more likely to take it. Because I wasn't actually leaving the site, and this assumes that I am, I felt less inclined to take it. But here we are on the surveys project where I do survey teardowns. So I decided to take it, and let's take a look. All right, so again, they're saying it's time to fill it out. They do have some mention here at the bottom, like still shopping, no problem, minimize the window, then come back when you're done. Seemingly harmless, but really not great for response rates. If you can nail the timing, take the effort to do that. I really doubt there are folks that are opening this back up to respond to the survey. So better to skip that messaging altogether and just position the survey at the right point so that it is, on the intent of exit intent. This is when it pops up. All right, let's go ahead. Okay, click here. All right. First line here. This survey will only take a few minutes of your time. When you have a claim like that, it's best not to follow it with a giant paragraph that is pretty dense and feels like it takes a lot of time to read. You want to demonstrate the ease of the survey simply by creating a survey that's easy to digest. This is the power of like showing, not telling. And right now, the claim is in direct conflict with what you're seeing on the screen. So the first 3 sentences are pretty important. I would actually pull those out. Thanks for agreeing. That's not always nice. The survey is voluntary and anonymous. Great. No personal information is required or requested. So that kind of detail is useful for me. It's good assurance and confidence. It's pretty standard procedure, especially for a government website. The rest of the data, looking at like Corporation Act and Personal Information Act, that level of detail is unlikely important for the majority of folks. It's kind of in the way. I would encourage tucking it away, like pulling it off screen, perhaps in a policy like the privacy policy bottom left. If there is a requirement to put it on here, like shrink down the font, separate out the first 3 sentences, and just really make this easy to digest. I would actually also take this phrasing right here and pop this up at the top. So the welcome isn't really necessary. It's drawing the majority of the attention. What I care about is doing the survey, you have a very small window of time that someone is, without any attachment or incentive, is willing to take a survey. So you want to really capitalize on that, carry forward that momentum as quickly as possible, not let them get slowed down or bogged down on this very first page. This instruction here, seemingly useful, but often we have like fillers unnecessarily, right? To sort of create a sense of rigor where we don't really need anything at all. You'll see as we start the survey, which let me do that it's not actually necessary, like follow the arrows to advance or return to a question. We kind of see from the way that this is like the design of it, this is a pretty intuitive feature. So scrap that instruction altogether. You want to make this intro really, really lean, effective, get them right into the survey. All right, so we're on the first question here. First question is a general one, and we're looking at a rating scale, and it's asking about my overall experience. So first of all, I haven't really completed my overall experience because I'm not taking this survey at the end of my experience, right? It sort of interrupted what it was that I was doing. And second, I don't really know how they're defining overall experience. I mean, I can kind of wager a guess and I can speak to my overall experience, but people are not processing and analyzing their experience of your site when they're on your site, unless you prompt and trigger them and ask them about specific things. This is a question that's better suited at the end of a survey, because what you want to do is start with more relevant questions that are specific to me and my experience and me as a person and a user of the website first. Then I can start to like trigger and jog my memory and understand what you're asking about, how I'm interacting with the website. It helps me start to actually kind of like define and qualify my experience, because otherwise people are sort of like, we're just on a web page looking for what we're looking for. We might get annoyed at certain points, but I'm not memorizing those and remembering them exactly and jotting them down or processing them. So a question like this, especially when we're saying overall experience, it's easy for folks, and you'll see I do this, like opt for the middle, like 4, 5, and 6, because I just don't, first of all, what's the real difference between 4, 5, and 6? And second of all, like, I just don't know how to define that. It can feel like a very innocent thing, but we're asking for data here. Like, if you imagine a company, they're going to take this, like, the overall experience of the website is on average 6 or 7 out of 10, and they're going to make decisions from that. But is that accurate data? Like, what is it really, really telling you? So you want to be really mindful of that, and the positioning, the phrasing of the question, defining overall experience. What is it that you want to do with that data? Because otherwise the question kind of falls flat, but you still walk around with this like 6 or 7 out of 10, and that's what everybody's saying, and either we're doing great or we're doing kind of neutral. So really pay mind to that before you throw in questions that I think are pretty like standard and thrown around on the web as like, if you do a search for what you should ask in a satisfaction, a website visitor survey. But are they always useful for you is a really important filter, a kind of way to screen the questions. All right, so prior to today, have you ever visited OCS? This is a better question. Would have been great to lead with a question like this. So I responded no. All right, which of the following describes the primary purpose of your visit? So you'll see here that I start to say make a purchase online, and then I hesitate and say check for a specific product, and that's what I end up selecting. So the thing you want to be mindful of here is like, are these actually distinct? It's very possible that I am trying to do multiple things. The goal of the site, like the purpose of my visit, is different to what I actually end up doing on the site. This is a really important nuance that we can kind of like lose when we are throwing together questions. So I wanted to buy, that was my overall objective. But the way that I ended up using the site was I kind of learned about cannabis a little bit, and then I checked for a specific product. It wasn't really a specific product. It was more like a specific category of what their CBD products were. So I don't really know where to fit that. And I don't know if what they're asking is do they really want to know what my intention was coming to the site versus how I used the site? Because often those are different. Like, yes, overall I wanted to buy, but I didn't. So having, as the question askers, having that distinction is going to be really important so that the user doesn't have to do the work of like thinking through how to answer this question. And ultimately then opting maybe for like an overall response just because it's easier. Which products did you shop browse today? Please select all that apply. So this assumes that I shopped products, which I might not have, especially if I was just here to learn about cannabis, which was an option in the previous question. Second thing to note here, this is like a lot of language that I don't know if this is language that every user, the full spectrum of users, would be familiar with. If it is, great, but just something to keep in mind. It's nice that they have kind of definitions here and ways to qualify so people can understand like, oh, well, did I want a flower? No, actually I wanted a pre-roll, because that's something that, so for example, I was looking for a pre-roll, but I wouldn't have known that pre-roll would fall into flower. Like I just didn't think about it that way. So it's helpful that they had that. And I wonder if there is an easier way so that this initial categories, I imagine it's helpful internally, business-wise, but is there a different way to present the data that's actually easier for the user? This might actually be user language, customer languages is great. Then you can go ahead and ignore that. But either lead with the business side and then have these qualifiers, or flip it and ideally you want to speak the customer language so they can answer more easily. All right, what is your preferred mix of cannabinoids? I mean, now we're stepping into a space that we are assuming that the user is sophisticated enough to know this language. Like, I knew the answer to the question purely because of the multiple choice. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just, I think it's important to consider, like, are we asking questions that we want to know without knowing if this is even the right audience? Like, do they even have a sense when they say not sure? Does that mean they're not sure about their preferred mix, or they don't even know about like what is a cannabinoid? What is this question even asking? So having a couple options there, different options that would fall under not sure, I think would help with this question. Were you able to complete the purpose of your visit today? All right, so this again is tricky now, right? Like if we don't know if purpose is defined as why I came onto the site versus how I used the site. So I said no because I wanted to buy something, but I also wanted to find a particular product. So two kind of purposes. And is that purpose I? Okay, no, that's completely stupid. I don't know why I said that. Anyway, so I had two intentions coming to the site, but I wasn't able to fulfill either of them. Like I found the site kind of confusing to navigate, and I couldn't really, it just wasn't clear to me what I was looking at when I conducted a particular search. So they asked me a skip question, right? Why were you unable to complete the primary purpose of your visit? Please select all that apply. Thing is, this is like quite a long list. You'll see that I actually like scroll down. So this is quite a long list, right? And I see that it's categorized, but people might not always think in categories. Like even though the categories were available, I was just looking at these individual things. I wasn't approaching the question rationally. So the creator of the survey is creating it rationally, but I am just looking for words that resonate with my experience. So you don't want to provide too many options. I mean, sometimes you can't help it, but if you can provide these bigger categories first and then drill down into like the subcategories so you can get more nuance, that's often a better option. Because here it's like, I mean, there's just a bunch of options that it's quite cumbersome to go through and comb through. All right, which products were you specifically looking for? So it's asking me now about my response that I said before, which was specifically flower. So that's great. We've got some like skip logic in here as well. I wonder if that question would actually be better on the back of the question where they asked about which, where I selected like pre-rolls and flowers, so that question has like a follow-up. You want to tie the questions that have skip logic like back to back. Rate how our site performs when it comes to enabling you to find what you're looking for. So I said it was good. Rate how easily our site is to navigate. So what's happening here is like, I'm just kind of saying 6, 4, 5, 6, like just in that range, right? The difference between each of these is so kind of minuscule for me that I'm now at this stage of like I'm just going through it, right? Like, let me just fly through and finish the survey. That is the last thing you want to happen. You want someone to be able to be reading the question and actually take the time to answer it. But if your survey is too long, if it doesn't feel relevant, if the differences between the questions are so minor, if it's cumbersome, like I just flew through all of those questions and then I land here. And it's like, did I just answer some of these things? Like, what do I say? So in the previous questions, I gave kind of neutral data, right? Like nothing committal. But here I have an out as well. Like I have not applicable. So I kind of just use it because I don't really know, like not all of it is just relevant to me. I don't know how to process this. I think we underestimate the amount of work it takes to take an experience and strap a number to it. This is a very unnatural process. It's not intuitive. Not even intuitive. It's just not natural. Like it's not an organic way that people think. Like, that date I had was like a 6 out of 10. We make a joke about that after. We abstract the experience and define it numerically, but it's not a normal way in the way that we think. So there's effort required to take an experience, understand that experience, right? Delivery service times, comprehend that experience, see if I kind of scan through, like, did I have that experience? Do I even know what their delivery service times were? Not for me because I didn't add anything to the cart. And then kind of respond accordingly. So like product information. Okay, what does product information mean? It means like, for me, I'm thinking, okay, well, I couldn't really find the product I was looking for. So does that count? Like there's a lot of the risk when we summarize and kind of group things together, like cannabis product selection. It feels like the summary is better, but I actually have to think more sometimes to figure out what you mean. And this is especially important in a long survey. And this is like already quite a long survey. So really want to keep all of these elements in mind. What other websites or apps do you find useful when researching for products? Select all that apply. So, I mean, I didn't read through all of this. I'm just kind of skimming to see what jumps out at me. And there was a none option, so I clicked that. I think that's fine. The other thing too is like when you have something where you have to scroll, it can make the survey just like the experience feels longer. So even bringing these up so you have 2 rows is helpful. Just to feel like, hey, it all fits on like a single page. This isn't so cumbersome. Other than OCS, have you visited other online recreational cannabis retailers in the last 6 months? No. A licensed retail store? No. These are fine. Okay, so the reason I got stuck there is because I haven't visited myself. I visited like with my husband. So I didn't know what to put. Like, are they asking if I visited for myself? I'm assuming that's the question, but so I just said no. That felt like the safer option. What will be your next step after this visit? Okay, so this was like, the trouble with a question like this is it assumes that I've thought about my next step. It doesn't exactly, because they have an option here, no next step planned, which I select. But they're looking for, the assumption here is like they're assuming that some people have a next step. And the what will be your next step after this visit throws people off, right? It's like I now have to think about what my next step would be, as opposed to responding from a place of like, this is what I'm going to do next. So this is a future focused question when the future is pretty immediate. It creates then a space between me and what I was actually going to do, because now I have to think about what I might do or what I'm going to do. And we're horrible at predicting the future, right? Like, so the nuance of the question here needs to be adjusted. Is it about what do we want to do next? What are we going to do next? Like, what are you, like, I think the question is more around the fact that I didn't have my purpose for the visit fulfilled. So what now? What am I going to do now? That's a question that I don't have to think about in the same way of like, what will you do, right? What will you do encourages, like, I kind of have to hypothesize and extrapolate and abstract from my situation. Whereas like, what are you going to do now is a now question, even though it's about the future. Much, 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 much easier to answer. Wonder how many people actually respond with no next step planned. How likely are you to recommend OCS.ca to friends and relatives? If you have listened to my NPS YouTube, you will know that I'm not a fan of this question. It distills a really complex notion of like satisfaction and defines it through recommendation, also asking like a future question when maybe I have recommended it already, but maybe I haven't. Maybe I haven't recommended it, not because it's a bad recommendation, because it's just not a fit for the person that I'm talking to. Like, there's so many variables here. So if you haven't heard that video, go check it out. I think it's the very first YouTube video I have from a month and a half ago, and you will hear all things that I have to say about NPS, but not a huge fan of this question. I do understand that companies still go ahead and use it, and it has kind of a bit of a legacy that way, but not a fan. There's also a ton of other data in here that they're collecting that is, in my opinion, far, far more useful and actionable. This is the kind of data that's like, you can kind of wear on a shirt, right? Like, you can just walk around the organization and say, hey, this is what we have, and this is how we match up to other competitors. I guess if they're collecting that data and you're collecting it and that data is faulty, you have like a faulty, but then two wrongs make a right, perhaps. Anyway, I won't say too much more about this, but highly recommend alternatives to this question. Based on your experience, how likely are you to return to OCS in the future? So this is a good question, right? Like, I mean, I don't like it because it's future focused, and I'm just like, how do you predict your behavior? You know, like the question is, a better question is not how likely are you going to, because now I have to guess. It's more like, oh, will you, no, I mean, that's kind of the same. Like, the will you return is still a future focused question. But I do think it's a better question than this. Like, how likely are you? It has that feeling of the survey. I mean, even like, do you plan to come back to OCS.ca in the future? Will you be coming back to the site? Or something that focuses on the now, that isn't like a how likely are you to return. What you want to know is about them returning. You don't want them to figure out how likely they are, because now this is like a prediction. So the phrasing is going to be really, really critical. It's worth spending some time on there. Did you experience any technical issues? All right, so we can see this survey has like tons and tons and tons of data. Which is fine, but this is like kind of the danger of surveys, right? We pack them and we're like, let's just throw in one more question. And if your question does not have a purpose, if your question does not have a specific decision or action it's tied to, and a use case outside of the survey, outside of the nice to have, do not ask it, right? It doesn't deserve a stage on the survey. It is not worth taking up the time of your user, right? Like, look at this. This is like 3 minutes into the survey. You want to be really respectful of their time, because if folks are not into this survey, like, they can just easily click out. So it isn't like you've caught them without any incentive either. There's no reason for me to stay. nothing concrete and like tangible other than one that I decide and I offer. You want to be the ones giving folks a reason. And one of the ways that you can do that is better questions, shorter survey, more direct, more clear, having really focused goal with the survey. So it's just easier to answer. All right. Have you ever purchased? Okay, that's fine. Okay, so compared to other options to purchase online, where do you think OCS is at a disadvantage? This question has great intentions, and it is just not a great question because I have to do the work. I have to think through not just what I don't like about OCS, but now comparing to competitors. And actually, in a previous question about competitors, I said that I don't research other options. So I'm not the right target for this question, right? Like I don't look at competitors. I haven't been to competitor websites. So they need to apply that skip logic here because now I'm just guessing. And maybe I will pick on something that okay, sure. Like this kind of reflected my experience when it's not accurate. And what I ended up answering was, let's see, actually, what did I click? There we go. I prefer not to answer, but not because I actually prefer not to answer, because I'm like, I'm not the right person, A, and B, this is work, right? Like answering this question for you is me thinking about the comparison. A better question is like something along the lines of like, what can we improve? Finding out what OCS is not doing as well, independent of competitors. And again, using that skip logic, because if I said I don't look at other folks, I'm just not the right target for this question. What could we do to help improve your future shopping experience? All right, so clearly they have this question. This is a great catch-all at the end. But this would also have worked really well with the categories in the previous question. What could we improve? And then you have suggestions here, and I get to weigh in on each of those suggestions. All right, what could we do to improve? That's fine. I don't think I filled anything out here. Okay, so now that what could we do to improve question typically signals end of a survey. And then they throw this help us get to know you a bit better by answering a few more questions. And I was like, oh, this is so long. Now, obviously, there will be people that answer your survey. Obviously, the survey experience is absolutely subjective. But when you have a survey that is a long experience and it doesn't feel relevant and it is kind of scattered in that it's addressing multiple goals, not only will that lower your response rate, but the quality of your answers suffers. So you will be taking pretty thin data and just kind of assuming that it's not that it's strong and sturdy and representative, and it actually isn't. When you have the optimal survey experience, the survey does not interrupt the data. Here, the survey kind of adds friction, right? The length, the questions, the fact that the questions are kind of different. There's multiple goals. All of those are interfering with the quality of my answers, and very if I wasn't doing the surveys project, I would have clicked out by now. So really spend time on this, on these surveys. Are there ways to break it up, to ask at different points? Can you send this out as an email? Can you offer an incentive? When people have an incentive, incentives are the biggest drivers of human behavior. They have an incentive and they will be more likely to endure the survey and give you quality data. They're not going to be focused on how long the survey is, because they're going to be focused on that they have an incentive at the end of it. So they kind of expect to, quote unquote, work for it. All right. Now we've got some demographic questions, fairly easy to answer. Fly through these. Gender, that's fine. Annual pre-tax household income, didn't feel like answering. Select the following. Okay, so just a ton of demographic, right? Data. And it's so, it's just tiring. I'm tired talking about it. And this is not the fault of this is not kind of a fault thing, but it's just that when we collect data from a survey, it's misleading. We just assume this is great data. I mean, you can get like 10 people who respond to this survey, and maybe the majority of them are answering in the rating scales of like the 0 to 10 rating. They're answering like 4 to 6, which is fairly like safe zone. And you just assume that that's accurate. So like, this is why surveys are dangerous, right? We have no way of knowing through the data that the data is wrong. So if we don't set up the right survey, if we don't ask the right questions, if we don't position it right, collect enough insights, make sure we're asking the right folks the right questions, we get data that we just assume is gospel, and it absolutely isn't. All right. So that is it for today. If you have surveys, send them my way. If you have questions, comments about this particular survey, any other surveys, I'm your gal. Drop them in the comment section below. I will reply, we'll chat and hash it out. And I will be back doing more survey teardowns for the surveys project. What else? If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. It's super helpful for me. It lets other people know that it's good content. I very much appreciate it. And if you don't like it, give it a thumbs down so that I know if I need to step up my game. If you have other thoughts of research questions that you have that you'd like me to do videos on, let me know. We'll just kind of like hang out in the comments. Subscribe to the channel so that you'll be the first to know when the next video is up, and I will see you then. Bye.